The betrayal hit me like a freight train. It wasn't a suspicion or a quiet, creeping doubt. It was a truth that landed squarely in front of me, undeniable and gut-wrenching. I walked into our bedroom that night, exhausted from work and expecting nothing more than a quiet evening. Instead, I found her was him. The scene was as cliché as it was devastating. Clothes scattered, whispers silenced as the door swung open, and two guilty faces staring back at me. I didn't speak. There was nothing to say. The silence hung thick in the air as I turned and left the room, the weight of what I had just seen threatening to crush me. My hands trembled as I closed the door behind me and walked out of the house. The betrayal wasn't just hers. It was his too. A man I thought was a friend. They had taken something sacred and shattered it without a second thought. But I wasn't going to let them walk away unscathed. The days that followed were a blur of emotions. Rage, sadness, humiliation. But beneath it all was a simmering resolve. If she had chosen to betray me, then I would ensure she paid the price. Not in a moment of anger, but through careful, calculated action. This wasn't about revenge. It was about justice. About taking back control of a life she had so carelessly upended. I started with the finances. Over the years, I had been the one managing our accounts, paying the bills, handling the investments. She had always left it to me, content to let me shoulder the responsibility while she enjoyed the benefits. That trust would now be her downfall. Quietly, methodically, I began to shift our financial landscape. Joint accounts were closed. The funds moved into accounts solely in my name. Investments were liquidated and the proceeds carefully hidden. Even the house, our most valuable asset, was refinanced under terms that left her with little claim to it. Next, I compiled evidence. It wasn't enough to know the truth. I needed to prove. I gathered every piece of documentation I could find. Photos, messages, receipts. I hired a private investigator to fill in the gaps, to ensure that when the time came, I would have an airtight case. Every detail was another piece of ammunition, another step toward reclaiming what was mine. Then came the legal preparations. I met with a team of attorneys, laying out the evidence and the plan. They were ruthless, their confidence fueling my own resolve. This wasn't just a divorce. It was a battle for everything. The assets, the house, the children. She had made her choices, and now she would face the consequences. The first hearing was a revelation. She walked into the courtroom with an air of defiance, her lawyer at her side. But as my attorney began to present the case, the facade began to crack. The evidence was overwhelming, each piece more damning than the last. The photos, the financial records, the testimonies from the investigator. Every detail painted a picture of betrayal and irresponsibility, a narrative she couldn't refute. As the hearing progressed, I watched her confidence erode. She avoided my gaze, her composure slipping with each new revelation. By the end of the day, the tables had turned. This wasn't just a legal battle anymore. It was the beginning of her unraveling, and I was just getting started. With the first hearing behind us, the battle moved into its next phase. The court had already seen enough to question her credibility, but I knew that wasn't enough. To truly win, I needed to dismantle every aspect of her life that she had taken for granted. The house was the first target. It was more than just a property. It was the symbol of the life we had built together. She assumed she would keep it, that the courts would rule in her favor for the sake of stability. But I had planned for this. The refinancing I had done months earlier, combined with the evidence of her infidelity, painted a different picture. The house wasn't hers to claim, and the court agreed. The ruling granted me sole ownership, leaving her with nothing but the clothes she had packed the night she left. The finances were next. Her lawyer argued for a fair split of our assets, claiming that she was entitled to half of everything. But the evidence of her betrayal, combined with her lack of contribution to our financial stability, tipped the scales in my favor. The accounts, the investments, the savings, they were awarded to me. She walked away with a fraction of what she had expected, her arrogance replaced by disbelief. But the most important battle was for the children. They were my priority, the one thing I refused to compromise on. I presented evidence of her neglect, her irresponsibility, and the toxic environment she had created. The testimonies from teachers, neighbors, and even our eldest child painted a clear picture. The court ruled in my favor, granting me primary custody. She was given visitation rights, but they were limited and supervised. The look on her face as the ruling was read was one I would never forget. The legal process was grueling, but each victory brought a sense of vindication. She had tried to destroy me, but in the end, she had destroyed herself. The life she had taken for granted was gone, replaced by the harsh reality of her choices. And as I walked out of the courtroom for the final time, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The battle was over, and I had won. The courtroom battles became my life, each session a new layer of strategy and resilience. The divorce proceedings, already bitter and drawn out, were entering their final stages. Every argument, Every piece of evidence, every deposition carried weight. I was no longer just fighting for assets or custody. I was fighting for closure, for justice, and for the life that had been torn apart by her betrayal. As the financial division came under scrutiny, her lawyer argued that she deserved half of everything. The claim was bold but predictable. They painted her as the victim of a neglectful husband, someone who had provided for the family but emotionally abandoned her. It was a calculated narrative, one designed to evoke sympathy. But they had underestimated the strength of my preparation. Months earlier, I had taken steps to secure when I could. The joint accounts we once shared were now fully dissolved, with records showing clear documentation of her extravagant spending during the affair. Her financial contributions to our life together were negligible, her dependence on me evident in every statement. My lawyer presented the data systematically, each fact and figure dismantling their claims. By the time the court reviewed the evidence, it was clear she had no grounds for an equal split. The house was a battle of its own. She argued it should be hers, citing stability for the children. But I had anticipated this too. The refinancing I had executed months earlier, combined with her clear infidelity, gave me leverage. My legal team argued that the house represented not just financial value, but emotional security for the children. Security I was best positioned to provide. The court agreed, awarding me sole ownership of the property. She was ordered to vacate within 30 days. Watching her expression as the ruling was read was a moment of mixed emotions. Part of me felt satisfaction, knowing that her entitlement had been stripped away. But there was also a lingering sadness. This was someone I had once loved, someone I had built a life with. Yet, her choices had turned that life into rubble. The fight for custody was the most grueling. The children were my priority, the one thing I refused to compromise on. Her lawyers tried to paint me as distant, too focused on my career to be an attentive father. They brought up moments of missed school events and late nights at the office, framing them as neglect. But I had anticipated this line of attack as well. My team countered with testimonies from teachers, neighbors, and even a child psychologist who had evaluated the kids during the process. The evidence of her affair became central to my case. It wasn't just about infidelity. It was about trust and judgment. She had brought her lover into our home, into the space where our children lived. That breach of trust was a defining moment. The court couldn't ignore the implications, especially when combined with her inconsistent behavior during the proceedings. The testimonies spoke volumes, painting her as impulsive and unreliable. When the ruling came, it was a vindication of everything I had fought for. I was granted primary custody, with her receiving limited visitation rights. The court mandated that her visits be supervised, citing concerns about her judgment and the environment she might expose the children to. The relief I felt was immense. For the first time in months, I could see a future where my children and I could rebuild without the constant shadow of conflict. The financial settlement was the final piece. Her lawyer pushed for spousal support, arguing that she had sacrificed her career for the marriage. But the evidence of her spending habits, combined with her actions leading to the divorce, weakened their argument. The court awarded her a modest settlement, enough to cover basic living expenses, but far from the windfall she had likely expected. Her lawyer's frustration was palpable, but there was little they could do. The facts were on my side. As the final gavel fell, signaling the end of the legal battle, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The process had been exhausting, both emotionally and financially, but it had been worth it. I had protected what mattered most: my children, my home, my sense of dignity. She had tried to dismantle everything, but in the end, it was her life that lay in ruins. The weeks that followed were a period of adjustment. The house, once a shared space, felt emptier without her presence. But it was also a place of peace, free from the tension and deceit that had plagued it for so long. The children adapted quickly, their resilience a constant source of inspiration. I focused on creating a stable environment for them, filling our days with routines and moments of joy. Her absence in their lives was noticeable, but not disruptive. The supervised visits were awkward and strained, the children hesitant to engage fully. Over time, they began to speak openly about their feelings, their confusion about what had happened. I listened carefully, answering their questions with honesty but without bitterness. They didn't need to carry the weight of our conflict. My priority was ensuring they felt loved and supported, no matter what. As for her, the aftermath of the court's rulings was a harsh reality she couldn't escape. The modest apartment she moved into was a far cry from the life she had once known. The financial strain was evident, her spending habits curtailed by necessity. Friends who had once rallied around her during the early days of the divorce grew distant, their sympathy waning as the full story became clear. She was alone, left to face the consequences of her actions. There were moments when I thought about reaching out, about extending an olive branch for the sake of closure. But each time, I reminded myself of the betrayal, the lies, and the pain she had caused. Forgiveness might come in time, but it wasn't something I could offer yet. My focus was on the future, on rebuilding a life that she had tried to destroy. The scars of the divorce remained, but they no longer defined me. I had faced the storm and come out the other side, stronger and more determined than ever. The battle had been won, but the journey was far from over. My children were my anchor, their laughter and love a reminder of what truly mattered. Together, we would move forward, leaving the past behind and embracing the possibilities of a brighter future. The weeks following the final ruling felt like the first taste of freedom I had experienced in years. The legal battles were over, the courtroom drama concluded, and the pieces of my life were finally falling into place. But with freedom came the daunting task of truly starting over, to rebuild not just for myself, but for my children, who had been caught in the crossfire of a war they never asked to be part of. The house became the centerpiece of this new chapter, no longer a battleground for lawyers and accusations. It transformed into a sanctuary. I poured myself into making it a home again, one that felt warm, safe, and filled with the kind of love that my children deserved. The walls that once echoed with tension were now adorned with their artwork, their laughter filling the space in a way that made the struggles feel distant and unimportant. Financial stability was another victory. The court's ruling had ensured that the bulk of our assets remained under my control. With her reckless spending no longer siphoning resources, I was able to refocus on securing our future. Investments that had been on hold during the legal process began to grow again. For the first time in years, I could breathe without the constant fear of financial ruin hanging over my head. She, on the other hand, was facing a very different reality. The modest settlement she had received was already dwindling, her spending habits proving difficult to break. The apartment she had moved into was small and bare, a stark contrast to the home she had once fought so hard to claim. The friends who had once supported her through the divorce had grown distant, unwilling to associate with the fallout of her choices. Her social circle, once vibrant and full of shared connections, was now eerily quiet. Supervised visitation with the children continued, though it became increasingly strained. The children, still young but perceptive, began to question the time spent with her. They noticed the awkward silences, the lack of energy in her attempts to engage with. She tried. I could see that she was making an effort, but the damage had been done. They had seen too much, heard too much. The betrayal wasn't something that could be undone with a few half-hearted smiles and promises. My focus shifted entirely to them. They became my world, their needs and happiness taking precedence over everything else. Weekends were spent at soccer games and dance recitals, evenings filled with homework and bedtime stories. I wasn't just their father. I was their anchor, the one constant in a life that had been upended. And while it wasn't always easy, it was a role I embraced wholeheartedly. Professionally, I threw myself into my work with a renewed sense of purpose. The legal battles had drained me emotionally and financially, but they had also lit a fire within me. I was determined to succeed, not just for myself, but to set an example for my children. Late nights at the office became a regular occurrence, but the rewards were worth it. Promotions followed, along with recognition from colleagues who saw the results of my dedication. She attempted to fight back in small ways, filing motions to modify the custody arrangement or seeking additional financial support. Each time, the court's response was the same: denial. The evidence of her behavior during the marriage and the divorce was too damning, her credibility too damaged. Each failed attempt seemed to weigh on her more heavily, her frustration spilling into the rare interactions we still shared. Despite everything, I couldn't bring myself to hate her. Anger, yes. Resentment for the choices she had made, the pain she had caused. But hate required energy I no longer had to spare. She had become a cautionary tale, a reminder of what happens when trust is broken and selfishness takes precedence over family. I didn't pity her, but I also didn't revel in her downfall. I had moved past that. My focus was on the future, not the wreckage of the past. The children's milestones became markers of our progress. Birthdays celebrated with laughter and joy, report cards filled with achievements that made me beam with pride. Each moment was a step further from the chaos, a testament to the resilience of our little family. They were thriving, and in turn, so was I. As the years passed, the scars of the divorce began to fade. They would never fully disappear. Some wounds leave marks that time cannot erase, but they no longer define me. I found myself smiling more, laughing more, and even beginning to entertain the idea of letting someone new into my life. It wasn't an easy fight. Trust was still something I struggled with, but the idea of love no longer felt impossible. It felt like a challenge I might one day be ready to face. She faded further into the background, her presence in our lives reduced to occasional updates and sparse visits. The children's questions about her grew less frequent. their focus shifting to their own lives and dreams. I didn't discourage them from seeing her, but I didn't force it either. They needed to make their own choices about the relationship they wanted with her, and I respected that. One day, as I sat on the porch watching the sun dip below the horizon, I realized how far we had come. The journey had been long and brutal, filled with moments of doubt and despair. But we had survived. More than that, we had thrived. The life I had rebuilt for myself and my children wasn't perfect, but it was ours. It was honest, stable, and filled with hope for the future. The betrayal that had once shattered our lives no longer held power over me. It was a chapter in our story, but it wasn't the whole story. The choices I had made, the battles I had fought, and the love I had poured into my family had brought us to this place of peace. And as I sat there, watching the light fade and the stars emerge, I knew we were going to be okay. The years that followed were a testament to resilience. The legal battles and emotional turmoil that had once consumed me were now memories. Lessons learned and scars earned. Life, while far from perfect, had settled into something steady, something fulfilling. My children were thriving, my career was flourishing, and I had begun to rediscover parts of myself that I thought had been lost in the chaos of betrayal. The house, once a symbol of conflict, was now a sanctuary. It had become a place of warmth, filled with the sounds of laughter, the smell of home-cooked meals, and the comfort of routine. Every corner held memories we were building together, new ones that replaced the shadows of the past. The children, now older, had grown into remarkable individuals. Their strength, their kindness, and their resilience were a reflection of the love and stability I had worked so hard to provide. My relationship with her, or rather, what little of it remained, had settled into a distant civility. The supervised visitations became less frequent as the children grew, their desire to see her waning with time. They were old enough to make their own decisions about the relationship they wanted with their mother, and I respected those choices. I neither encouraged nor discouraged them. I simply supported them in navigating the complexities of their emotions. She, on the other hand, had not fared as well. The life she had once enjoyed was now a distant memory. The modest apartment she had moved into after the divorce had become her permanent residence, a far cry from the home we had once shared. Financial strain was evident in the way she lived, her once expensive tastes now tempered by necessity. The friends who had once rallied around her were long gone, their loyalty eroded by the truth of her actions. Every so often, she would attempt to revisit the past, a message, a request for more time with the children, or even a suggestion of reconciliation. Each time, I responded with the same quiet resolve. The past was behind us, and there was no going back. I had forgiven her in my own way, not for her sake, thus for mine. Carrying the weight of anger and resentment wasn't something I was willing to do anymore. But forgiveness didn't mean forgetting, and it certainly didn't mean reopening wounds that had finally begun to heal. My career, once a refuge from the turmoil at home, had become a source of pride and purpose. The work I had thrown myself into during the divorce had paid off, resulting in promotions, recognition, and a sense of accomplishment that extended beyond the office. I had built something that was mine, independent of the life I had once shared with her. It was a reminder that I was capable of creating something meaningful, even in the aftermath of destruction. But perhaps the greatest triumph was the relationship I had with my children. They were my anchor, my reason for every decision I had made. Watching them grow, succeed, and navigate their own paths was the most rewarding experience of my life. They had seen the worst of our family's struggles, but they had emerged stronger, wiser, and more compassionate because of it. Their resilience inspired me every day. As for me, I have begun to entertain the idea of love again. It wasn't something I rushed into. Trust was a fragile thing, and I was careful with my heart. But over time, I met someone who understood my past without letting it define me. She was patient, kind, and grounded in a way that felt refreshing. Our relationship was built on honesty and mutual respect, and while it was still new, it brought a sense of hope I hadn't felt in years. The final moment of closure came unexpectedly. One afternoon, as I sorted through old files and documents, I came across a folder from the divorce. Inside were court papers, financial records, and evidence I had gathered during the legal battle. For a moment, I sat there, staring at the pieces of a life that no longer existed. Then, without hesitation, I shredded the contents of the folder, keeping them no longer served a purpose. The battle was over, and I had no desire to hold on to the remnants of a war that had long since ended. That evening, as I sat on the porch watching the sun dip below the horizon, I felt a profound sense of peace. The journey had been long and painful, filled with moments of doubt and despair, but it had also been transformative. The betrayal that had once defined my life was now just a chapter in a much larger story, a story of resilience, growth, and the unyielding strength of family. My children joined me on the porch, their laughter filling the quiet evening air. In that moment, I realized that I had everything I needed. The scars of the past were still there, but they no longer hurt. They were reminders of what I had endured and what I had overcome. And as the stars began to appear in the night sky, I knew that the future was bright, not just for me, but for the family I had fought so hard to protect. The betrayal had taken so much, but it hadn't taken everything. In the end, I had rebuilt a life that was stronger, richer, and more meaningful than I could have ever imagined. And for that, I was grateful. The quiet sense of resolution that had settled over my life was hard-won. Years of battles, emotional, legal, and personal, had brought me to this point. I had fought to reclaim my dignity, my stability, and most importantly, my children. Now, as I stood at the precipice of a new chapter, I realized that the past no longer had a hold on me. The betrayals, the heartbreak, the anger, they were no longer weights dragging me down. They were lessons, painful but transformative, that had shaped the man I had become. The scars of the divorce were still there, etched into the fabric of my life, but they no longer defined me. Instead, they were reminders of my resilience, of the battles I had fought and the strength I had discovered within myself. The person I was now felt worlds away from the man who had first walked into that courtroom, trembling with anger and hurt. I was stronger, wiser, and ready to embrace the future with open arms. The children were my greatest source of pride. Watching them grow into confident, kind, and self-assured individuals was a daily reminder of why I had fought so hard. They had endured so much, the upheaval of their family, the tension between their parents, and the whispers of a history too complicated for them to fully understand. Yet they had emerged stronger, their resilience a testament to the love and support I had worked tirelessly to provide. My relationship with them deepened as they grew older. They began to understand the complexities of our past, asking questions that I answered honestly but gently. They deserved the truth, but they also deserved a father who could show them that the past didn't have to define their future. I made it my mission to be that father, to be the anchor they could always rely on. C, too, had moved on, though her journey was far different from mine. The life she had once envisioned for herself had crumbled, replaced by a more modest existence. The choices she had made and the consequences she faced had left her isolated, both financially and emotionally. The children saw her occasionally, their visits polite but strained. She tried to connect with them, but the distance, both physical and emotional, was something she couldn't easily bridge. I no longer felt anger toward her, only a quiet sadness for the life she had thrown away. For me, moving on wasn't just about survival, it was about growth. I had found a sense of purpose in my career, in my role as a father, and in the quiet moments of reflection that had become part of my daily life. I learned to trust again, both in myself and in others. Slowly, cautiously, I opened my heart to the possibility of love. It wasn't easy, but it was worth it. Meeting someone who saw me for who I was, flaws and all, was a gift I hadn't expected. Our relationship wasn't perfect, but it was honest, and that made all the difference. The final chapter of this journey came not with a dramatic revelation or a grand gesture, but with a quiet realization. One evening, as I sat on the porch with my children, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of gold and pink, I felt a profound sense of peace. The battles were over, the wounds had healed, and the future stretched out before us, full of promise and possibility. The past would always be a part of me, but it no longer defined me. It had shaped me, taught me, and strengthened me, but it was no longer a weight I carried. The betrayal that had once shattered my world was now just a memory, a chapter in a story that had continued to grow and evolve. The life I had rebuilt was one of love, resilience, and hope, and for that, I was profoundly grateful. As the stars began to emerge in the night sky, I looked at my children and saw the future in their faces. They were my greatest triumph, the reason I had fought so hard and endured so much. They were my anchor, my light, and my hope. And as I sat there, surrounded by their laughter, the quiet hum of the evening, I knew that we were going to be okay. The journey had been long and painful, but it had led us here, to a place of peace and possibility. And in that moment, I realized that the best chapters of our story were still ahead. And that's the end of today's story. If you enjoyed this journey, please give this video a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more incredible stories like this one. Got thoughts or experiences you'd like to share? Drop them in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.